My son Jason announced it before I had even found my seat. "I've already spoken to someone," he said, voice low and deliberate, "about getting proper help for Mom's finances." 14 people were gathered around his dining room table in Belleville for Thanksgiving dinner. Every face turned toward me. Jason stood at the head of the table with one hand resting on the back of my empty chair. His expression was careful and sad and entirely prepared. "She's been missing payments," he continued. "Overdrafting. We can't keep pretending everything is fine." I was 68 years old. I had driven the 45 minutes from Kingston myself, without a single wrong turn, and brought the butter tarts cooling under foil on the sideboard. No doctor had said any such thing. My accounts were in order. My mortgage had been paid off 11 years before Harold died, and the only bill I had ever missed in my life was a water bill during the ice storm of 2013, when half of eastern Ontario lost power for 9 days. What Jason did not know was that I had been keeping a red notebook for 6 weeks, and what neither of us knew yet was that the branch manager at TD on Princess Street had already flagged his name. My name is Bernadette Chalmers. I spent 31 years as a registered nurse at Kingston General, the last 12 of them in the cardiac unit. I retired at 63, 2 years before Harold's stroke. Harold was a high school vice principal who believed in labeling everything and keeping his receipts. Between the two of us, we had never once bounced a check or carried a balance on a credit card past the due date. When he died 3 years ago, he left behind a folder for every account we owned, cross-referenced with a handwritten index at the front. I kept his system, I added to it. Our house on Frontenac Street was paid off. Harold's life insurance had been modest, but I also had my nursing pension, my Canada pension plan, and a TFSA and RRSP that I had contributed to steadily for 30 years. A financial advisor named Mr. Arsenault reviewed everything twice a year and told me each time that I was, in his words, more organized than most people half my age. Jason knew I owned the house. He knew I had income. He did not know the specific amounts because I had never told him. I had planned to leave the house to him and a protected share to his daughter Nina. The rest would fund 2 nursing bursaries through Queen's University, one in Harold's name and one that would carry both of ours. I had never used money to direct my son's choices. I paid for his college because I believed young people deserved to begin without debt. When he and his wife Paula bought their first home, I gave them $20,000 and asked for nothing in return. When his landscaping company hit a rough stretch 2 summers ago, I quietly covered 3 months of equipment lease payments and did not mention it again. I thought help should work like shelter. You build it for someone, and then you let them live their own life inside it. Jason believed shelter meant ownership. The first time he suggested I sell the house, he wrapped it in practicality. "Too big for one person," he said. "The stairs, the maintenance, the garden." I had taken 3 steps up to my bedroom my entire life because Harold and I had converted the den on the main floor into our room years before he got sick. A neighbor's teenage son cut the grass every 2 weeks for $40. I walked to the market on Tuesday mornings and did my own grocery shopping. I told Jason I was comfortable. He suggested a condo near him and Paula in Belleville. "We looked at a few," he said, as though he had been doing me a favor by researching property I had never asked about. I declined. He did not push. He began worrying about my memory instead. The concern started small and easy to dismiss. He called to ask if I remembered giving him a check at Easter. I did. He said it still hadn't cleared my account. It had. I checked online that same afternoon and found the transaction. He told me I had called him 3 times on a Wednesday. I had called once in the morning to ask about Thanksgiving plans. He suggested I was repeating myself. I was not, but there is no clean way to prove something did not happen. Then things began to change inside the house. A statement from my investment account disappeared from my desk. I found it 2 weeks later inside a magazine rack in the living room. I had never put papers there in my life. A reminder I had written in red marker on the kitchen calendar. Annual RRSP top-up, November deadline, had been crossed out with a single black line. I use red for financial reminders. I do not own a black marker. Jason had visited the weekend before the calendar changed. He still had the key Harold had given him years ago for emergencies. I did not say anything about it directly. Instead, I went to the dollar store on Division Street and bought a red notebook with a soft cover. Each evening before bed, I wrote down where I had gone that day, who I had spoken to, and anything in the house that had moved or changed since the last time I'd looked. I noted the investment statement with the date it disappeared and the date I found it. I noted the calendar. I wrote down every phone call Jason and I exchanged, with the time and what was said. I hated writing those entries. Each one felt like building a case against my own child. So I also wrote possible explanations in the margins. Maybe I walked to the living room while reading and set the statement down without thinking. Maybe the calendar marking faded and someone used what was nearby to rewrite it. Maybe I was wrong about the phone calls. I was still protecting Jason from the version of events I did not want to be true. My granddaughter Nina was the one who saw it before I could name it. She was 24, in her third year of nursing at Queen's, following a path I had told her she did not have to follow, though secretly I was glad she had. She came for dinner on the last Thursday of every month, and always brought sourdough from the bakery near campus, because she knew I loved it but found whole loaves too large to finish alone. One evening she arrived while I was going through my bank statement with a highlighter, cross-checking against the notebook. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and watched me work without asking questions. After a while, she said, "Grandma, has Dad been in the house recently?" I asked why she was wondering. She said his truck had been in the driveway on a Monday, 2 weeks earlier, when she'd driven past on her way to a placement shift. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but she'd heard him tell Paula on the phone that he'd dealt with the accounts situation, and she had not understood what that meant. I showed her the red notebook. She read 12 pages without speaking. When she closed it, she looked at me the way nurses learn to look at a patient when the chart says one thing and the patient says another. "You need to talk to your bank," she said. I told her I had been planning to. I also told her I had already booked an appointment with my lawyer. Mr. Arsenault. No, Mr. Arsenault was my financial advisor. My lawyer was a man named Mr. Lacasse, who had handled Harold's estate and had the kind of steady attention I had come to associate with people who understood that paperwork mattered long after the feelings involved had cooled. Nina asked whether my power of attorney was still the document Harold and I had drawn up together. I said yes, naming each other as primary and Jason as secondary, in the event neither of us was available. She was quiet for a moment. "When did you last actually read it?" I retrieved it from the fireproof box in the closet. We read it together at the kitchen table. It was a standard enduring power of attorney for property, which in Ontario activates only if the grantor becomes mentally incapable. Jason was listed as a contingency option only, not as a primary decision-maker, and only under circumstances that required a physician's formal determination of incapacity. Nothing in that document gave Jason any authority over my accounts while I was living independently and making my own decisions. 3 days after that conversation, Jason called and asked if I wanted help streamlining my finances. He said he'd found a simpler way to manage bill payments and would I mind if he came by to set it up. He arrived on a Saturday and spent 2 hours showing me an online system I already used and understood. At the end, he placed a document on the table. He said it was a form from the bank to add an authorized user to my checking account. "Just for convenience," he said. In case something happens and you need someone to make a transaction quickly." I read it carefully. It was not a bank form. It was a general power of attorney. I told him I would have Mr. Lacasse look it over before signing anything. Jason said it was routine, that it wasn't that kind of document, that he was only trying to protect me. I asked him to leave it and said I'd be in touch. His expression changed, just for a second, a flicker of something harder than concern, and then the careful sadness returned. I called Mr. Lacasse on Monday. He reviewed the document and confirmed it was a general power of attorney that would give Jason broad, immediate authority over all my financial assets, not a banking convenience form, not routine. He told me not to sign it and asked me to bring the red notebook to his office. I met with him on a Wednesday. He listened to everything, read the relevant entries, and then said something I have thought about many times since. He said, "The people who do this almost never believe they're doing anything wrong. They've already spent the money in their heads. The paperwork is just them trying to catch up." He advised me to speak with my bank and to contact the seniors safety line, which I had not known existed until that afternoon. It is a provincial service in Ontario. A helpline for older adults who believe they are being financially exploited by someone they trust. I called them that same evening. The woman I spoke with was calm and specific. She gave me steps. She did not make me feel foolish for not having seen it sooner. That night I wrote one line in the red notebook. I am not imagining this. I changed my locks the following Saturday. Jason called when he discovered the key no longer worked. He said he was worried about me. He said that refusing help was a symptom. He called Dora, my younger sister, and told her I had become paranoid and was pushing the family away. Within a week, 3 relatives had phoned to ask how I was really doing, with the particular gentleness that means someone has already given them a story. That frightened me more than the document on the table. He had already built the framework. Every choice I made could now be fitted inside it. I went to TD with Nina beside me. We asked to speak with the branch manager. Her name was Ms. Thorburn, and she was the kind of person who showed nothing in her face while you talked, which I have learned is usually a sign that they are listening very carefully. I explained that my son had been managing certain communications on my behalf without my authorization, and that I wanted to understand exactly what access existed on my accounts. I brought the notebook. Miss Thorburn asked a series of specific questions. She typed while I answered. At the end, she said she would need to review some internal records and would contact me within 2 business days. She did not promise anything. That plain response felt more honest than any reassurance would have. She called in less than 24 hours. There was, she told me, a record of an in-branch transaction 4 weeks earlier in which someone had presented credentials and requested a change to my account notification settings. The notifications, low balance alerts, large withdrawal warnings, had been redirected to a secondary email address I did not recognize. She asked if I had authorized this. I had not. She also said that 3 ATM withdrawals had been made from my account at a location I did not typically use, on days when my own card had not been active. She was careful with her language, but careful language in a bank manager's office tends to mean something specific. There was, she said, branch footage. I did not see all of it. I did not need to. When I came back to the branch the following morning with Mr. Lacasse, Miss Thorburn showed us the sections relevant to the report. In the first clip, Jason stood at the ATM on Bath Road on a Tuesday afternoon. He used a card. The timestamp matched a withdrawal from my account that I had not made. In the second clip, Jason was inside the branch, speaking with a teller. The transaction record from that date showed a change to the account's authorized contact information. He had presented a document. The teller had processed the request. The document he had presented was the power of attorney I had never signed. Or rather, a version of it. Mr. Lacasse examined the copy the bank had on file and said 2 words I will not forget: "This is forged." I do not know how long I sat in that office without speaking. At some point, Miss Thorburn placed a glass of water in front of me. I remember thinking that Harold would have known exactly what to do. He would have opened his folder and found the right page. And then I realized I had brought the red notebook, and that was exactly what I had done, for 6 weeks, without knowing why. The report was filed that afternoon. The seniors' safety line connected us with Adult Protective Services. Mr. Lacasse revoked the fraudulent power of attorney through the proper registry. My account notifications were restored. The unauthorized access was blocked. That weekend was Thanksgiving, and that is when Jason stood at the head of his table and told the family I could no longer manage my own finances. I let him finish. He described overdue bills that did not exist. He described a conversation with my doctor that had never taken place. I knew this because I had called Dr. Mahmoud's office that morning and confirmed that Jason had never been given access to my file and had never requested it. Jason said the family needed to come together to protect me. He said he had already spoken with a financial planner about a managed account arrangement. He placed a folder on the table near my plate. Inside was a document I recognized, a version of the power of attorney, signed this time with my name. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I looked at Paula. She had been very quiet throughout dinner, the stillness of someone who has rehearsed what comes next. She addressed me as Bernadette when she finally spoke, her voice bright and careful. "Bernadette, we've been so worried. We only want what's right for you." I had always thought Paula was simply reserved. Sitting there, I understood she was something else entirely. Nina was across the table. She gave me a small nod. I asked Jason when I had signed the document in the folder. He said I had sussed it 6 weeks ago at the kitchen table, the afternoon he visited to help with my online accounts. I had never signed it. He knew I had never signed it. I placed the folder to one side. I told the table that I had spent the previous Wednesday at my bank branch with my lawyer. I told them the branch manager had reviewed footage from several dates in October. I told them that a power of attorney had been filed with the bank without my signature. I did not call it forgery. The word arrived in the room without me saying it. Jason said I was confused. He said the strain of living alone had affected my judgment. He said this was exactly the kind of episode he had been trying to protect me from. I opened my bag. I placed the red notebook on the table. I read 4 entries aloud: the disappeared investment statement, the altered calendar, the Bath Road withdrawal dates, the Saturday when he had presented the document and I had declined to sign. I had noted the time. I had noted what he was wearing. Paula stood up. She said the notebook proved nothing. She said I had always been dramatic. She said Jason had sacrificed enormous amounts of time trying to help me. Nina said, "The branch footage shows Dad at an ATM on a day he told you he was in Peterborough for a client quote." Paula turned to Jason. The quiet that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard at a dinner table. Jason's explanation came in layers, each one replacing the last. He said the withdrawals were repayment for the equipment lease payments he had never mentioned to me. He said the account changes were to protect me, not exploit me. He said the signature was a clerical misunderstanding, and he had intended to ask me again. With every answer, he moved further from the version he had offered 14 people 20 minutes before. Dora, who had called me 3 times that week to ask how I was really doing, set down her fork. She looked at Jason. She said, "You told me the doctor recommended all of this." Jason did not answer. I told the table that the matter was already being reviewed and that I had nothing more to say about it. At dinner, I was going home. He asked whether I was going to report my own son. I told him the report had already been filed. Paula picked up her water glass. Jason sat very still. Nina collected her coat and walked out with me to the car. She drove me home because my hands were shaking, though not from confusion. The formal process was slow and not dramatic. Jason was interviewed twice. The bank cooperated fully. Mr. Lacasse submitted documentation including a certified copy of the original unsigned power of attorney, which matched the filed version exactly except for the signature line. A forensic comparison was ordered. In December, Jason accepted a conditional agreement. He acknowledged unauthorized access to my account. He repaid the withdrawn amount, $4,800 in Canadian funds, taken in amounts small enough not to trigger automatic alerts, which was not a coincidence. He was required to complete a financial counseling program and to have no contact with my accounts or legal documents, unless I specifically requested it in writing, with a witness present. There was no criminal conviction. There was a signed record that could not be revised later. For me, that was what mattered. I changed my power of attorney entirely. Mr. Arsenault was named as the primary property attorney alongside a lawyer appointed by his firm. Nina was listed as a secondary contact, not a decision-maker, but someone to be notified. The nursing's bursaries stayed in the plan. Jason's share of the estate was placed in a trust with conditions that made early access impossible, and Paula removed from any designation. I did not remove him completely. That decision surprised even me. But I am 68 years old, and I have watched enough families in hospital corridors to know that grief and fury can live in the same person without either one canceling the other out. The hardest month was January. Harold had loved the first snow of the year. He used to carry 2 mugs of coffee to the front porch and just stand there watching it come down. That January I stood in the same spot alone and thought about the fact that the son Harold and I had raised together had used our house, our trust, our quiet private life as a calculation. I cried for a long time. Not tidily. Nina called later that afternoon. She asked if I was all right. I told her I was, mostly, and that I was also furious and sad and still not quite willing to let either feeling decide what came next. She laughed, just a little. She said, "That sounds exactly right." I returned to my regular routines in February. I walked to the market on Tuesdays. I attended my book club at the Kingston Frontenac Public Library. On the second Thursday of each month, I sat in on a presentation at the Community Legal Clinic about elder financial protection. First as someone listening, then as someone answering questions from the audience. I knew the answers by then. I had lived the questions. According to the Seniors Safety Line, financial abuse is the most commonly reported form of elder abuse in Canada, and in the majority of cases the person responsible is a family member. I wrote that down in the red notebook. Not because I needed the reminder, but because I wanted it there in my own handwriting. For the same reason I had written everything else. So that it could not be moved, covered over, or quietly removed while I was not looking. In March, Jason reached out through Mr. Lacasse to ask whether the family could meet to discuss rebuilding contact. I asked for a written letter first. The letter took 4 weeks to arrive. It contained no questions about the inheritance, no demand that I correct the family story. No suggestion that I had caused his marriage problems. He wrote that counseling had forced him to examine the moment concern became control. He said he had watched Harold's illness deplete their savings in the last 2 years of his life and had spent the 3 years since telling himself, "My money was simply sitting there becoming a problem I could not manage." He had stopped asking whether that was true. He had just decided it. I read the letter twice. I looked for the part where he asked about the inheritance. It was not there. That absence was not innocence, but it was something. I agreed to meet at a coffee shop on Princess Street. Neutral ground public with Nina present and Mr. Lacasse reachable by phone. Jason arrived early. He looked tired in a way that did not ask for sympathy. Paula was not with him. He said he was sorry. He named specific things. The account changes, the withdrawals, the document. He said he had stopped being able to separate his fear about money from a sense that my choices were a kind of threat to him. He said he had treated that feeling as a reason, instead of as a warning about himself. That honesty was the most useful thing he had said since I was seated at a table, with 14 people watching my face. I told him what limited contact would look like. We could speak once a month. He could visit at my invitation only, with advance notice. He could not enter my home without me present, could not contact my bank, my doctor, or my lawyer directly, and could not relay information about my health or finances to other family members without my permission. He agreed to all of it without negotiating. We have had several phone calls since then. They are careful and short and occasionally almost ordinary. He asked in June how the garden was coming in. I told him I had finally planted the lavender Harold had always wanted, but we had never gotten around to. There was a pause, and then Jason said, "He would have liked that." He would have. That is still true, even now. The notebook sits on my desk. The first 2/3 are full of fear and dates, and margins full of kinder explanations I wrote for my own child. I still write in it most evenings, not because I am afraid, but because I am paying attention, and paying attention has always been the thing that kept my life mine. I turned 69 in September. Nina came for dinner and brought sourdough from the bakery near campus. We ate at the kitchen table with the window open and talked about her rotations and whether she wanted to specialize in cardiac the way I had, or try something else entirely. After she left, I washed the dishes and looked around the kitchen. The counter Harold had refinished himself the summer before he retired. The calendar I had replaced with one where the squares were wide enough to write in clearly, the window that fills with light on autumn mornings, in a way I had taken for granted for 40 years and no longer do. I dried my hands and wrote the day's entry in the red notebook. Dinner with Nina, sourdough, lavender still going by the fence, made my own decisions today, and the day before and all the ones before that. Life mine, still.